You're listening to What It's Like with Luce, a podcast highlighting ordinary people doing extraordinary things. I'm your host Lucy Norris, and on today's episode, I'm speaking with the founder of the Coven, a support network for female founders. Growing up, this week's guest expected to take a very different path in life. Wanting to study medicine, she found herself being unable to finish her A-levels and having to pivot in life and find a new adventure. Trying out a multitude of different jobs, she fell into a weekend role at a wedding florist where she worked until she'd saved enough money to head off to Thailand. Finding herself at a crossroads again whilst out there, she made the decision to set up her own florist business and came back to Essex ready to begin life as a young entrepreneur. Discovering how lonely working for yourself can really be, she came up with the idea of a subscription-based online support network which would eventually find itself featured in Forbes, Huff Post, The Evening Standard, to name but a few. Sharing her experience, here's what it's like to be Sapphire Bates. Welcome, Sapphire. Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. How I like to kick things off is to just ask you a little bit about your childhood, which I know is kind of a weird question to start with, but just to let people get to know you a bit more, what was it like for you growing up, and what was that experience like?
I don't think I've actually ever been asked that before. I was really fortunate. I had a really lovely upbringing with my mum and my dad. I have a younger brother and sister, but there's a really, really big age gap. So I was an only child for up until I was like 9. So most of my childhood, I got to be the only child. And yeah, I just feel that I was like very fortunate. I had quite an ordinary upbringing. I grew up in Surrey and Sussex and Surrey before we moved to Essex when I was a teenager. So I loved being outside. I loved animals. I loved learning. I was just a proper sort of geeky little kid.
And did you have any idea of what you kind of wanted to do with your life? I suppose you're saying like you were really interested in animals and things like that. So it sounds like you potentially wanted to go down the veterinary route or that kind of thing. I'm just thinking of what you're doing now compared to what you said you were interested in. So how did the later years kind of unfold when you had to start making decisions about what you wanted to do?
So it's all ended up super random, to be honest. For a long time, I really wanted to be a zoologist, which is what Steve Irwin actually was. But I don't think that was like my younger childhood years through early teenage years. I don't think I fully understood exactly what a zoologist did. A lot of it is like studies, which I probably actually would have really enjoyed. But I think I kind of got into my early teenage years and then realized you had to go to uni and you had to basically do a lot of years of all this studying and learning before you actually got to hang out with animals, and that very few people actually had a job like Steve Irwin, RIP, where you got to go and rescue crocodiles and pick up snakes in the Australian wild back. So I think early teenage years I was kind of like kind of started to change what I wanted to do. For most of my teenage years I wanted to be a doctor. I really loved medicine. It kind of fitted in with the fact that I love science and learning, so that's what I was kind of training for. That's what I chose my A-levels based on. So I was doing like chemistry, biology, history and psychology. But I basically got kicked out of sixth form before I finished my A-levels. I basically was very cocky by that point and felt that I'd kind of surprised myself with my results in my GCSE and done really well. I was like, oh my God, maybe I'm actually really clever. And just felt that I didn't have to try that hard at A-levels, which is obviously anyone that's taken A-levels will know it's totally not the same thing. It requires lots of effort, especially things like chemistry, which was just like mind-blowingly difficult. And I just, basically had really poor attendance, didn't put any effort in, so they made me leave. And after that, for a bit, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I studied fashion for a couple of years. I did a very short stint doing an internship at ITV because I thought I might want to go into media or be like a TV runner and work my way up, but I didn't really enjoy it that much. I thought about going into recruitment. I had some interviews for that. What are the other things? Again, like film studies. I did that for a little period at a different college and then left that. And I basically didn't really know. I ended up getting a weekend job in a wedding florist, and I ended up, like, I literally did it because my mum was like, you need to do something, you need to start figuring out what you're going to do. I'd been working in retail, so I was a supervisor at Primark Glamorous at the time, so I didn't mind working. Like, I had a pretty good work ethic and liked earning money, but I just had no idea what I wanted as like a career. So I started doing that and doing it through the summer, and then I just ended up asking her if she'd take me on as a trainee, because I was pretty good at it, and thought potentially that's something I could train as and it might be a career and it would make my mum happy, that I was doing something. So she took me on as an apprentice, and I did that for 2.5 years. I ended up quitting that to go to Thailand, and I just ended up staying in a little town. I don't think it's even that small. I think this was a long time ago now. I think it's grown quite a lot, but it's called Pai. It's like in the northern Thailand near the Burma border. And I just basically was there, just not really doing a lot. Had
What
no
was that like, though? Because
amazing.
yeah, I was gonna say, wow, like that must have been such a cool time.
Yeah, I loved it. Like, that's one of my like favorite times of my life. I think it was my first real taste of like freedom, having like no responsibility. I didn't have to work because I'd saved for it, and I couldn't work because I only had a tourist visa. So I was just, yeah, basically living my life. I was still a teenager, not really doing a whole lot. I absolutely loved it. Yeah, it was really amazing, but obviously eventually I started to run out of money, and because I wasn't working and I wasn't made of money, and even though I'd been frugal, I was like starting to run out of cash, and I basically just spent loads of time like Skyping my mum every day, trying to like brainstorm what I was going to do. And I kind of, because I had that taste of freedom, I was really against having a boss and having to go back to being told what to do and having like regimented work hours, having to go back to the UK. And my mum kept saying like, maybe you should start a business. And I just like, I really didn't like the idea of it. I kind of viewed it at that point as something that you could work really hard at, and it might be like totally pointless. Like, you could work for years on it and not make any money. And that, to my little greedy, like 19-year-old mind, was kind of like, why would you do that? No one's definitely going to pay you. So she kept bringing it up, and I kept being like, oh, I don't know. And in the end, it was kind of between that and taking a teaching job in Chengdu in China that I'd got like through past the interview stages for. And I, to be honest, was more swaying towards that. I was really, really tempted by it. But my mum was like, I think you're actually going to be a bit bored doing it. Like, I don't particularly like kids either. So she was like, I'm not sure teaching's like 100% your job. And Chengdu's like really rural. There's not very much to do there. So she was like, I don't think it's going to be like in Thailand where you're with all these people that are coming through the town and making loads of friends. She was like, I think you're going to feel a lot more isolated. And I think, to be honest, she was probably right. And I basically ended up going with the idea of starting a business. So I started a florist, because that was the only thing I had like any training in. I mean, I still don't really think, like, I wasn't super qualified for it. I'd passed like my apprenticeship, so I was technically a junior florist, but I had never really had to order my own flowers or work out like quantities and create quotes for people and actually run the business. I'd just been helping with the making stuff. So it was all like a massive shock. But yeah, it was basically my mum's influence and kind of just my situation at the time that meant I ended up running businesses, and then I've done that ever since.
Yeah, that's a pretty crazy story. You've definitely had such a diverse work history in like so many different areas, which is really cool. And then what were those initial few months like? As you said, you know, you'd never really done the business side of things. I'm sure it was super overwhelming, but how did you get past that block of like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this, you know, I just know how to arrange flowers?
I think, to be honest, I was really young, and I think I just had quite a lot of like bravado, like false confidence. I just really thought that because I believed I could do it, that I could do it. So although, you know, I really was muddling through and kind of making things up as I go along and figuring them out as things cropped up, I really was a bit full of myself and really was just like, I can do this, like I can definitely make this work. And I kind of just had to, like, I was like, well, I've got bills to pay, you know, my studio cost a lot of money, I had like car on finance, my phone, I was paying my mum rent. I had all this money I needed to like find. And my mum's not like super soft. Like she's not like, oh yeah, don't worry about paying me rent for a few months. You're like, it's fine. She was like, no, you need to go and make money and pay the rent if you want to live here. So I think I kind of had to make it work. And then I had that kind of false kind of young, innocent kind of confidence that I could do it. And I just kind of, I just made it up as I went along and just kind of dealt with things as and when they happened. And then you just start to learn. I mean, that all feels like a lifetime ago now, to be honest, but you just kind of start to learn how to do things. And then once you've learned one thing, you know it again for the next time, and you just kind of build up a kind of knowledge bank of how to do things.
Yeah, I think it's that thing a lot of people say, like, if you ask people that have been young entrepreneurs, the biggest thing they said that they had on their side was that sense of, I guess, naivety, that you just kind of, you didn't know what was coming, so you just went with it. And then also I feel like you learn so much more on the job than you ever would in school or anything like that. So that's incredible that you built that for yourself. So you had this thriving business, you know, you'd achieved it, it was working. So why did you decide to close it?
So basically at the time, the Coven was kind of born out of a need for me. So I was really enjoying running a business, but I didn't particularly like making flowers that much. Like I obviously, like as I kind of explained, I kind of just fell into it. I did it because I thought it'd be a good idea and the option was kind of there, and I didn't really have any other options at that point. And I tried lots of other things that I didn't really fancy. I'd never been 100% like over the moon with making flowers and that whole process of like basically everything that makes you a florist. You have to get up super early to go to like the markets, and like it's very physical. People imagine it's quite like delicate because you're like placing flowers, but you're carrying like heavy buckets of water. I was like doing big weddings and big events for companies, and you're having to carry like huge installations that weigh a ton. You're having to climb up and down ladders and like hang things from ceilings and create mechanics that are safe to be above people's heads, and lots of stress in it as well. It is really full on. We could be doing as many as like 5 weddings a week, and they're all having to happen and be made on like the same few days because of the longevity of flowers, or lack of. So it was quite stressful. It was making money, it was profitable, but it's a business that's very like hit and miss. Like some months, if you didn't have any bookings, and there weren't many like small flower orders, you could make no money, or very little. And then you could have months where you make thousands. And I was still quite young, so I probably wasn't very good at, I probably wasn't sensible enough. Like I was always investing more money into the business. I wasn't like balancing out the money and being like, right, I wasn't in a position where I was able to pay myself like a set amount per month. I basically took whatever was left and would be like, right, I need an extra 400 to pay my bills, and would make that 400. So it was like good and I enjoyed it, but I was starting to get a bit bored of the actual floristry, and it wasn't 100% hunky-dory in terms of like how it worked. That was stressful, constantly being like, right, are we gonna have enough money coming this month? And then at the same time, alongside that, my now ex-boyfriend was working and living in Australia, and that was like kind of his first taste of like, I'd obviously already spent time in Thailand, and that was his first taste of like living elsewhere. And he got that thing that I think everyone wants, where it's kind of like, I don't know that I want to come back to the UK, like I think we should live somewhere else. And I was like, well, that's great, but I have a business that's like has a physical studio space. Like it's all happens in certain places. Like I can't just up and leave. And I think, you know, I just remember us having a conversation on Skype, and I was kind of just like, oh, like, you know, I need, like, if I only had an online business. Like I remember him being like, oh, I don't, like, I think we should live somewhere else. We should go and live in like Amsterdam or Europe, somewhere in Europe. And I was like, yeah, it would be amazing. Like, I don't know how I'd do that. And then I think my brain just from there like ticked forward and was like thinking about online businesses. It was things I'd not really paid any attention to, and kind of started looking into like the whole thing about having an online business, how they worked, which ones were successful. And I think the idea for the Coven just kind of came up because my boyfriend was working away. I was by myself all day, every day. I was working by myself. I was like not having time to socialize with friends or anything like that. And I was like really lonely for those years that I ran the florist, and that was something I'd been experiencing anyway. And then I think the two things kind of just like clicked together. I was just kind of like talking, I think with my mum, it's usually with my mum, and saying, like, I wonder if you could like create a paid space where, people who were all alone, like working alone, living alone, could kind of come together and like find support and like friendship and basically feel less lonely and like not have that isolation that I've experienced, because I kind of spoke to other people at events and stuff and found that I'd kind of open up and be honest and say, oh, I found this actually quite isolating, and people would be like, yeah, no, it totally is. It was definitely like something other people were feeling. But like all these things came together. I'd like been to events and I thought events are great, but I didn't really ever have the time to go to them. I was like, they're really good when I go and I definitely meet people and I definitely feel less isolated afterwards. But running a business that was as busy as mine and was busy, like I would work, like it was erratic. I would work late nights. I would have to get up really early. I'd have to work weekends. I'd never know if I'd book an event and never know whether I'd actually have the time to go. So I was wondering, like, could I create something that was online, like where you kind of log in and then you'd connect and network with people like online. And that's, basically how it was born. And then, I launched it. I spent 9 months working on it and building it and like getting it ready and kind of like doing loads of market research and just trying to figure out exactly how it would work and how to best run an online business. And during that period I broke up with my boyfriend and went to New York because I didn't know what else to do, and I didn't want to be there in the UK. So I was coming into like the winter season, so I literally booked a flight for like 2 days later and flew to New York and found an apartment in 2 days. Wow. And just like hid out there while I like carried on like kind of prepping the Coven and like getting everything ready. And it was also a good test to see like, okay, could this actually work as an online business, like if I'm doing all of this, getting it ready from somewhere else. And then launched it when I got back, and quite a few months later actually it kept getting put back, and then it went really well and I closed my flower business, like officially closed it. I'd already stopped taking like bookings and stuff because I knew I just didn't want to do it, and was hoping that the Coven would allow me to do that. And then like 2 months afterwards it went really, really well. So I closed my florist and just went full-time on the Coven.
But in terms of online businesses, because I feel like they're kind of such a gray area at the moment, because everyone wants to be online. Everyone wants to be working online because it seems like the ideal type of life. But did you ever struggle in the beginning with the monetization side of things in terms of like building a community and then actually making money for yourself through it? Was that ever a barrier or anything that caused you hassle in the start?
I don't think it was a barrier. I mean, it's the same as having a physical business. You have to build an audience. You have to have people who want your product, and you have to be offering a product, whether that's an online product or a physical product, that they see value in. So, I mean, by this point, I'd learned quite a lot about business, and I was, my florist, we'd opened a flower school. We had like a business course that I was running that just like, it wasn't like a full, like, I'm going to teach you business. It was just like, here's some good things I've learned about floristry that have helped me make my florist business profitable, that I've noticed other people are doing. Come and hang out with me for the day at my studio and I'll like help you with it. So I'd been doing loads of research for that anyway and kind of get more into the business side of things, which is what I was finding that I loved. So I feel like because I was like in that headspace of really, I would read any book, I would read any article, I'd find any bit of information on the internet that I could, I'd speak to people who had done it, and I did loads of market research to make sure that people actually wanted it and they wanted to pay for it and how much they wanted to pay for it. I built up an audience. I worked on my social media before I actually started trying to make money. I think sometimes the problem, or sometimes why we see it as a barrier, is because we want to do it and then we want to do it right then, and we kind of try and launch something and get it paid. But if you're trying to create a community, you've got to find people to join that community. You have to have an audience to like sell to, basically, and to show what you're creating. And I think that's the same even if it's not a community. If you're just starting up from scratch and you've just started your social media and you've got 10 followers and you haven't got a big network of people that in that industry, then it can be quite hard. That is like then potentially a barrier, but I spent a really long time preempting that in advance and kind of working that out before I started monetizing it.
What do you think it is about the Coven that, I suppose, cut through the noise of other online communities or other spaces offering that same sense of, community for entrepreneurs?
I think, to be totally honest, like when we started the Coven, there were a lot less memberships. Like I think I had very good timing, and I was watching the Coven and looking at payment models and trying to figure out how it was working. I was reading a lot about like the subscription economy, looking at why all these businesses were doing it like this, and deciding that might be good. There definitely wasn't very many memberships. There wasn't very many memberships. There weren't any memberships that were specifically about providing a space, specifically about isolation, about providing you with support and networking. That didn't really exist at that time. So we were kind of the first to do that. There's like definitely loads now, and I definitely like obviously wasn't the first membership. There were loads of memberships, there always will be, but it wasn't as full of a space. Like there was definitely less competition, I guess you'd say. Like there was less people in the industry trying to do the same thing. Now there's a lot more, but even then, like what was out there, I was specifically tailoring what I created as something different. So I'd already had experience starting a florist, and there were millions of florists. Like you were literally elbowing your way in amongst everybody and trying to find your feet and stand your ground and find the thing that made you different. And that was something that I'd kind of like really learned to do with my florist, and I kind of carried forward into the Coven. Even though there was less people doing similar things, I was like already really aware that was just something that was super important for a brand, to really have an offering that was different, and how much easier that would be. So I worked really hard on making sure that what I wanted to do didn't exist, and that we were doing something different, so that it was a totally unique offering and it was going to be its very own brand. And I think that's super important. And I think so, we're long standing. We were kind of had a chance to get running and get people through the door before other people all started realizing how great memberships are, and creating them, which really helped. I think if I started it now, it'd be a lot more difficult. You're up against so many other people, and you've got to, again, build that audience, get people to listen to you, get people to see you as different, which is hard. So that really helped. And I think I'm not really sure. I guess I've tried to run the business really transparently, like my social media, everything. Like I show up as myself. I don't, like, if I'm working in my pajamas, I'll show up on my pajamas. Like, I think trying to run a community and trying to run a space where people can connect and they can make friends and feel supported has always been quite important to me, to be transparent and to be really honest and upfront about the way that my business runs and the way that I work and who I am, because I want to genuinely connect with people. I don't, want to make my life look like, I'm super happy with my life, but I don't want to try and really rose tint everything, which is something that we often do on social media. And maybe for some businesses that might be an important thing to do, but when it's a community, I think transparency is the best, like being real and being able to actually connect with people.
Yeah, and you've built such an amazing community. I love the branding and the name and everything. I think it's so cool. So I guess, what does the future hold for the Coven, and has it been impacted at all due to the virus or anything like that, or I guess in the opposite, has it grown bigger because more people are online and more people are maybe experiencing that need for community?
I mean, future wise, I don't know. Like I really do go with the flow, and so far all of my businesses and all of the changes that I've made to my business or businesses have been a product of something that's happened in my life. So I've really built my businesses around my life as opposed to the other way around. So as and when I need a certain lifestyle, or I want to work a certain way, or something isn't working for me in my work, then I tend to create a business or build a business around that, as opposed to starting a business and then trying to fit my life into that. So I don't really know in terms of the future, because I'm kind of just going with the flow. I'm really happy with the business and how it runs. I'm launching another business next spring, like a fashion business or something totally different.
Exciting.
As a kind of like side hustle, like I don't have any plans for it to grow as big as the Coven. It's just something I'd quite like to challenge myself to do on the side. Now that we've kind of reached a point where the Coven has enabled me to have a couple of staff members, like part-time, and not everything is on me to do it. But in terms of like the Coven and where that's going, I don't really know. We're just very much going with the flow and responding to what our members want and what's working and what isn't, and just seeing where we end up. I think, yes, we've definitely been affected by the virus. I think people's impression is probably that we would have done really well, because we're an online business, we're a support platform, but it's all about how the economy is doing and how our members are doing. As soon as like our members are financially impacted and financially struggling, a lot of them cannot afford to keep their membership. They just can't. If you've got to choose between paying your mortgage or paying for a group that you love, but ultimately your mortgage lenders don't care about, then you have to go. And so as soon as like our members are impacted, we are impacted financially. So we did lose quite a lot of money, but I had basically, I just dealt with it. I was like, okay, this is probably going to happen. Obviously I did freak out a little bit in the beginning. Like when we first went into lockdown, we lost loads of members in one go, and I was like, oh my god, like okay, breathe. Like I was like, crap, what am I going to do if everyone leaves? Like how am I going to pay my rent? But I was just like, okay, I just need to think on my feet, and like just try and deal with it. So yeah, I was like, okay, right, we're going to provide free support calls. I will just give up my time for free to chat to members that either just need someone to like, a shoulder to lean on, an ear to listen, and if I can be helpful in terms of their business, if they are needing to pivot, if they're needing to think of ways to make money, can I brainstorm with them? Can I go through and be like, give advice and be like, okay, yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, have you thought of this, or what about this, or I see a problem with this, just so that they're not thinking of that by themselves. And basically, how can we be as helpful as possible in the situation? How can we be something that people are going to rely on during this time, and then see is worth keeping paying for if they can. So we were doing that, which helped us to retain some members. And then I basically decided to launch some programs. So I was like, okay, maybe I need to like not rely too heavily on the membership, and try and think outside of the box. So yeah, it was kind of a really mixed bag.
It sounds like the Coven has a really bright future, and it's so exciting to hear about new stuff that you're launching. So definitely keep an eye on that to see what that's going to be. I just have one last question for you, and then I'm going to let you go because I've kept you for ages. But if you had to give your 10-year-old self just one piece of advice, what would it be for them moving forward in life?
Oh, what a question. I find it hard because there's like almost so many things you'd want to tell your 10-year-old self. I think basically I'd probably be telling myself to just do the things that I want to do. I think life is full of like so many, like you just don't know what life's going to throw at you. And I think when you go from that period of being like 10 and you go through like teenage years are tough, like really tough. And I think we're thrown with so much worry when we get into those years, and we feel like we need to know who we want to be and what we want to do and where our life is going. And actually, like, we don't need to know that. Like, I feel like my own path was like pretty squiggly, like pretty random, and I don't know where it's going to end up. Like, I've no idea. I don't feel like this is the end of it. I'm sure I'll change careers at some point. And I feel like I almost wish I kind of knew that. I mean, hindsight's a wonderful thing, but I kind of wish I knew that it was okay to do all of those things, because I felt like at the time, quite often when I was doing them and when I didn't really always know what I wanted to do, that I was like lacking somehow, that I should know. But actually looking back, I'm like, fuck it. Like, you don't need to know where you're going. Just like follow whatever interests you and excites you and see where you end up.
Yeah,
sorry, that's not the most distinct advice, is it?
No, it is. It's just like follow what you're passionate about, which at the end of the day, everyone wants to do anyway, and if you do end up doing something that you're not that interested in, it's always for, I guess, financial gain, which is perfectly fine. Everyone needs money, you know, like passion doesn't put a roof over your head. Well, it can in some cases, but you know. So yeah, I think that's an amazing piece of advice, to just follow what you're interested in, which you have done, and it's taken you to some amazing places by the sounds of things. So it's so inspirational to hear your story, and I just want to say thank you so much for giving up your morning to chat to me and to share all of your insights. It's been really interesting.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me. I hope I didn't waffle too much.
Thank you so much for listening, and as always, please rate, share and leave a comment if you like what you hear, and don't forget to follow @whatitslike_pod on Instagram and Facebook. To find out more about Sapphire and the Coven, visit the links in the show notes. I'll be back next week with more inspiring stories, but for now this has been What It's Like with Luce.